I seem to have just lost.
Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight on THEOSOPHIA, Esoteric Studies, I'm proud to bring you Lynne Salomon Micelli of the Association for Research and Enlightenment here in New York City. Greetings, Lynne. How are you?
Greetings. I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you, Hercules.
You have a wonderful guest tonight who's written a wonderful book, so I'm looking forward to your interview. If you need me, I will be here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Just to explain a little bit what the ARE of New York is. It's the ARE of New York Edgar Cayce Center. And ARE stands for the Association for Research and Enlightenment. It's the organization that grew up around the work of Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce, if you don't know, was an American mystic and psychic. He lived from 1877 to 1945. And he gave over 14,000 psychic readings on an amazing variety of topics, ranging from health and healing to reincarnation to building a perpetual motion machine. And the ARE promotes research into all the topics of his readings and offers courses and workshops and study groups on those topics. And that's how I came to know our guest tonight, who is Karen Frances McCarthy. Karen was born in Dublin, Ireland, and she is an author, a teacher. She was formerly a political journalist. In fact, in 2007, she was an embedded reporter with the troops in Iraq. And she's a spiritualist medium. So she's got some pretty amazing stories to tell. To develop her mediumship abilities, Karen underwent years of intensive training at the world-renowned Arthur Findlay College in England, which is a very prestigious school of spiritualism and psychic sciences. There's really nothing like it in the United States. She has 3 awards from the school, certificates, they call them certificates of recognition, in mediumship, spiritual healing, and public speaking. She's now a PhD candidate at the University of Birmingham in England, where she's doing research on ghost literature, which I would love to talk about another time. But right now, what we're going to be talking about is her book, which is titled Till Death Don't Us Part, Till Death Don't Us Part, A True Story of Awakening to Love After Life. This book received all kinds of critical praise, many more glowing reviews than we have time to go into here. So tonight, we're going to be talking about the experiences that led Karen to write this book and completely changed her career path, and how she feels the story can help other people deal with loss and maybe understand a little bit more about how our world intersects with, our physical world intersects with other realities. So Karen, thank you so much. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Lynne, and thank you for that very, very long bio. I sounded very impressed with myself.
Well, you are impressive. So tell us about your experiences that led to this book.
Well, as you mentioned, I was a political correspondent, and I was actually in Virginia, which is, as you know, how I came across the ARE in Virginia, when I was researching my first book, which was actually part of the Northern Ireland peace process. It was when I was doing political work. And while I was in Virginia doing some interviews and researching that book, my fiance, who was back in New York, got a phone call from the hospital to say he had just dropped dead of a sudden heart attack in New York City. And so I was actually staying in the house of a friend who sort of house sitting, this huge big old house in the middle of nowhere, almost in Virginia, when all sorts of, odd things started happening, which of course, the first thought was, oh my God, I'm out of my mind with the grief, But as they continued going along, I thought this is not me losing my mind. Something is going on here. And so I ended up, if we have time, I can read a short little passage of one of them. But, I was seeing sort of black figures. There was the furniture was moving and creaking, electronics were turning on. There was somebody always sort of tugging on my hair. There was all sorts of things going on that took me an awful long time to understand what was actually happening. And somehow, the synchronicity, kismet, whatever you want to call it, where I was in Virginia was really close to the ARE, the international ARE. It was very close to a spiritualist church, and not very far from the Monroe Institute, and then there's the University of Virginia School of Perceptual Studies, and it was almost like the sort of Area 51 of the afterlife. And I was just that's just where I happened to be when all of this happened. And so it actually started, strangely, with a Catholic priest, because I'd been raised Catholic. I hadn't seen the inside of a church, I would say, in 30 years when this happened. And I was wandering around one day, sort of in a fog, when I heard, I kind of realized I was lost. And when I kind of roused myself, I realized I was standing outside this tiny little country church and the bell was ringing for Mass to start. And so I went in and afterwards dropped into the rectory to see the priest and was chatting with him, ended up bursting into tears. Poor man, didn't know what to do with me. And but I was telling him all of this stuff was happening when he pointed out that, no, this is signs, which just sort of knocked me into a tall hat, really, because it was not something I expected to hear from a Catholic priest. But he said that quite a few of the parishioners had these experiences after their loved one died. And so I sort of took that on board and I started doing a lot of research, a lot of reading, interviewing people who had written articles just to make sure they were authentic, went to the ARE, went to the Spiritualist Church, and it sort of ended up on this very, very long sort of journey that made me realize I had beautiful conversations with the lovely Professor Lou Legrand, who's since departed with the spirit world himself, but a huge sort of journey and education in what was happening, to understand that what the nature of this sort of awakening to the fact that consciousness continues after death, which for most people, I'm sure for a lot of the listeners, it's like, well, we kind of knew that. But for me, it was a radical turn to have to make. And it was not an easy turn, took quite a lot of work but it's one of those things where the right people, the right places, the right experience all kind of come to converge to help have that light bulb sort of finally pop on, And so when I got back to New York, I was at the ARE, which at the time I think was on West 30th, was in Chelsea. And I started to have, we would be sitting just sort of in healing groups, and somebody's grandmother would come sit beside me, and finally, actually, Peter Goldbeck, one of the practitioners there, was like, you really need to do something with this. I mean, this is really helping a lot of people, which is when I ended up starting to do a lot of training and education at the Arthur Findlay College, because I did remember, my mother did remember me having this phenomena happen as a child, but, I got into my teens, I had zero interest in it, and it just sort of stopped. So all of these decades later, it just sort of popped back on again. And at that point, people I came across like Peter were like listening to what was happening, witnessing what was happening, and had said, you really should do something with it. So I really wanted to make sure that I was properly educated, properly trained. I even did a course with the Institute Counselling in Scotland in bereavement counselling, because I was just so concerned about sitting in front of the vulnerable with this. And so that's really where that journey ended up going. It was radical, very quick, the turn, and just sort of set me off on a completely different trajectory. So all of the events of that are what are in the book. I don't know if that's backwards or not, but I don't know if it's mirrored or not, but so I put them together and finally got around to putting them together in the book, which White Crow Books published there just, when we ended up in COVID. And we talked about this before. I believe we did a chat with the ARE about it as well, which was lovely.
And your experiences since you wrote the book, how have you found that what you've spoken to a lot of people about the book. You've done many book talks and so on. Mm. How have you found that it's helped other people or affected other people?
Well, I think that, when you sit down to just talk to somebody, there's very, very limited time. So if somebody's curious and wants to believe, there's a lot of people want to believe if somehow this phenomena and this concept can be presented to them in a way that they can actually take on board, that makes sense to them, So there's a lot of people who are not religious, but who have, most people have had some kind of phenomena happen, whether they recognize it or not. And so there's a lot of people want to believe, they want to sort of dispel doubts, they want to sort of understand. And it's more than can be conveyed in a conversation. To, for them to have that epiphany, it takes more than a 10 or 15 minute conversation for that to happen. And so what I found is when people have read the book, and we've gotten loads of emails about this, when people have read the book, they have the whole story. They can kind of read on their own time. They can reread parts of it and digest it and let it sink in. And I think that makes a big difference because they're finding the whole story, not just anecdotal bits of evidence or whatever. And so I feel like it sort of builds in that way, so it kind of takes people along. So people who would, you can never convince a skeptic. If a skeptic wants to remain a skeptic, they will remain a skeptic. But there are people who would, if this concept could be presented to them in a way they can relate to, would be quite open to exploring it. So I think that's where the book, being an actual whole story, start to finish, has been quite helpful for people. So I've been told, that's what people come back with me, because people, they go back and they read passages multiple times, which you can't do in a conversation. So that's why I think the book has been more powerful in terms of reaching people who really are just looking for something they can believe in.
Do you hear from a lot of people who have had losses, who are bereaved?
Yeah, we'll get a lot of emails, and then I do a lot of talks. A lot of people have come to a lot of the events that we've done around the book as well. And we've done a lot of podcasts as well, as you know. And so a lot of people kind of call in, a lot of people send emails saying either it helped it was sort of the missing piece, the puzzle that they needed to be able to go, now this makes sense to me. Because it's very practical, because it's written by a journalist, and it's written by a journalist who was not a willing convert, and I've always said to people about my mediumship, I'm a very reluctant medium. I certainly didn't go looking for it, and it was only that it came back, when it kind of came back again, came back so strongly and in such detail that, other people pointing out, it's actually immensely helpful when you can give all of this detail about somebody's loved one and then pass along the message, that it's that meaningful for them. And what's also happened is an awful lot of people, having read the book, came for either private mentoring or private mediumship sessions, which is wonderful for me, because it means that they're already coming to the session with a certain amount of knowledge or understanding of afterlife communication and of concepts of consciousness. So, it makes it a much, for me anyway, well, and I believe for them too, I've heard quite a lot of people say this, it makes the experience of the private session more profound, because they understand more about how this works and where it's coming from and what to and not to expect. And so instead of me trying to educate people on mediumship, we can just get right into working with the loved ones, because that understanding is already there. So that's been hugely helpful to me in my practice, I have to say. And for the people who come to me.
Do you find that some of the people who come to you have had experiences themselves, but they've been saying, well, it's just my imagination?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I get a lot of the people who can't get on board with a lot of the stuff that they're reading. And I think they appreciate the fact that I started from a very skeptical position. And in a very a very sort of conscious way, had to be convinced myself, And so a lot of people come along and always say this: I had something like that, and I thought it was just my mind, And then, so I always ask people, just be open to the possibility. Be open to the possibility, because if you're open to the possibility the first time that happens, I'm not saying you have to jump on board and get on board with it and say, I saw this and, oh, that's definitely my God. But at least be open to the possibility, because if you're open to the possibility the first time, then it opens the door for more of these encounters. Professor Lou Legrand used to call them extraordinary encounters, but it sort of opens the door for more to be aware of more extraordinary encounters, which brings an awful lot of consolation and an awful lot of reassurance and a lot of comfort, especially to the grieving. But there is that problem, and it's a good point you pointed out, because not only are people like I was worried because they're grieving, and then they think, oh, I'm delusional, this is wishful thinking, I'm imagining this because of the grief. And then you have the extra burden of then, if you do start trying to open up to the things that are happening, any little things can happen, all sorts of little synchronicities. I talk about them in the book, some of them in the book. Professor Legrand wrote a lovely book, Love Lives On, about grief and signs and whatnot as well. And what happens there is that then they'll go to their close friends or go to family and say, I really think this is happening because this happened, this happened, this happened. And then other people say, it's just the grief, and they dismiss it when they're already struggling to trust and to deal with their own doubt. So going to other people that can put the kibosh on it, So it's nice to have a sort of a community, to find a community of people, which I was very fortunate to find in the Spiritualist Church and in the ARE in those very early days, of people who weren't going to naysay it, so that you could remain open. I think that's very important, because people say to me now, oh, well, my sister, brother, or uncle doesn't believe me. What should I do? And I quite simply, don't talk to them about it. Quite simply, find somebody who is on the same page as you, find somebody who understands this, so that you can keep your heart open. Because already people are already trying to find a way to believe. Really, the last people you need is the people who are going to say, it's all in your head. You really want people who can share experiences with you. You want to be able to read materials, for example, that are authentic and that will help support you in that.
And your relationship with your fiancé, basically, you feel it's continued. Can you talk about that? Yeah,
absolutely. So I get quite a lot of messages from him, and as being mediumistic, I actually hear or see what it is he's conveying. But both my parents are in the spirit world. I hear from them all the time. There's a gang there now, since he passed. But so I find, you have to be reasonable. It's really, it's not the same relationship, obviously, as when you're in physical form. It cannot be. And so it does require sort of learning the language of the spirit, understanding how those in the spirit world communicate, understanding the nature of telepathy, which is basically what it is, and being able to do the sort of practices, the sort of meditations and stuff that help you become more sensitive to receiving this sort of information is key as well. So it does kind of require a bit of an adjustment on how we live in our lives. But, so if I need some help, for example, I'll say, could use a hand. Can you, help me with this? And the help can come in all sorts of ways. Sometimes it's the direct communication from him. This is what you want to do. Sometimes, like in the book, I talk about how I had to get out of my apartment in Brooklyn and find a new apartment, and how he showed me a map with the love heart on the spot. And when I looked it up, there was this apartment, fantastic apartment there, rent stabilized, everything. Some of it's like that. And sometimes it's helpful people. I think this is very common. This is the way most people who aren't clairaudient, for example, or clairvoyant, can't receive this information. Loved ones will put helpful people in your path, where there will be and they will draw, because, you know, they can hear, they can influence our thoughts. We give them clearly permission because they're our loved ones, to sort of make us look over here and notice, oh, I should go check that out over there. And that's where there is something helpful, either a helpful situation or a helpful person there. And so there's loads of ways that these relationships can continue. And the more sensitive we become ourselves, the more we can just sense their presence, which is beautiful, so comforting. That just takes practice working with our own sensitivity as well. So there's lots and lots of ways that the relationships continue. They just, you know, we just have to understand that we have to learn how to be in these relationships now in a different way, not expecting them to be the way they were when we were in physical form, but they are. It's kind of an adventure in a way. You know, it's like learning how to be together in this new way.
Do you find that some people are having these experiences, but they're frightened by them?
Yeah, sometimes people, see, the thing is this is why I'm a huge advocate of proper education, proper reading, proper experience, is that there's an awful lot of superstition flying around, that's been flying around since Greek literature 2,000 years ago, or Dante in the Middle Ages. And it's been kind of co-opted and carted along in our society and reinterpreted in all these superstitious, nonsensical ways. And so a lot of people, really because they don't know any better, think there's something fearful. And there's all sorts of things like, oh, you become aware of your mother, for example, giving you a hug. Oh, your mother is lost and earthbound and clinging on to you or sucking the life out. And all of this craziness out there that's just posted all over social media. There's no veracity to it at all. And what it does is it robs people of these beautiful continuing relationships that are immensely healing in our grief process as well. I mean, we're going to end up there sooner or later, you know, but for this temporary period of time, we have our relationships continue in the stream of consciousness, just in physical separation. And so, you know, I actually teach a course now, which for this reason, because so many people were coming to me and so many superstitions were doing so much harm, and they didn't know what was true and what wasn't true. So I started actually teaching a course specifically designed for the bereaved to try to address these superstitions, to try to help them understand how these relationships continue in a healthy way, so that people are not robbed of this love. I mean, it's just beautiful, enduring, unconditional love that everybody deserves to have. And nobody deserves to have that stolen because somebody has some medieval concept or other, or some religious doctrine or other that isn't even true.
I suppose that your experiences are part of the reason that you decided to do your PhD on ghost literature.
Well, on that specifically, yeah. Well, you know, I've been saying for years and years, I must go back and do that PhD, and I never got around to it. And so finally, you know, we got into COVID, and who knew how long that was going to last. So I thought, well, I might as well start doing some research now. So I spent a long time, should I do it in religious studies, should I do this? And then I thought, no, you know what? I love writing, and I love what's going on now in ghost literature, because what's happening now in contemporary, you know, all art, literature, all art is a reflection of the society from which it emerges. That's just the nature of art. And so what I started noticing was a new sort of trend or a shift in what was going on in terms of ghost literature, ghost fiction. And so I got very interested in, why is this? Like, what is going on in our culture? So very quickly, for example, you know, ghost literature used to always be, you know, it was always, the ghost was like the secondary character, you know, and always came back to haunt somebody who was running around on their feet. Or they were coming back for revenge, or they were coming back to help somebody find out who murdered. This was kind of the traditional ghost literature. what I started noticing was that the literature, there's a whole kind of genre now of literature that's been, and I mean, Man Booker Prize winning literature and New York Times bestselling literature. So this is not, this is like quite a broad phenomena, is that the action has been sort of shifted into the afterlife. And the ghosts are now the main characters and the heroes and the narrators of the story. And I was like, well, isn't that interesting? Why is that? And so that's what I started looking into. The cultural, what's happened in the late 20th and 21st century that's shifted our understanding of consciousness in the afterlife. And how is that manifesting in art?
Does ghost literature include movies, the work that you're doing?
I'm only looking at literature because for a doctorate it's be very focused. So my doctorate is in English literature, so I'm looking at actual fiction. But yeah, no, but I haven't seen the same radical shift in film that I'm seeing in literature, to be honest. So like The Others, for example, or The Sixth Sense, they're very traditional themes, very old traditional themes, just done in film. But what's happening in literature is very different.
Well, maybe those books will make their way into the movies.
Yes, hopefully so. Hopefully they will. Well, actually, one of them did. One of them is The Lovely Bones.
That's right.
Yeah, because half of that book is set, because the narrator is the murdered Susie Salmon. She's in the afterlife. It's her story. It's never usually the ghost story, you see. But now it's become the ghost story. I use the word ghost just because that's the genre, the spirit, whatever you want,
Well, I guess we are beginning to come to terms with the fact that we're all going there, and it's not like the end when we go there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, and interesting you say that too, Lynn, because in these books, there's no like we die and we go to heaven. It's not like we die and we go to that kind of theological concept of like this heaven. No, we die and it's like all these different states. It's like actually what Andrew Jackson Davis, Andrew Jackson Davis's body of work is at the Edgar Cayce Library in the Area Library in Virginia, where he always was an advocate that there were 7 layers, 7 dimensions to the afterlife, and we land, we get to the next one, we do whatever, we grow, we go, and we keep advancing through the afterlife like that, which is kind of interesting because he's quite obscure, Andrew Jackson Davis. But this is what these novels are all looking at. There are, so like with The Lovely Bones, she dies and she goes to what she calls small heaven. Over the course of the novel, she progresses into what she called wide, wide heaven. And this is common to all of these. Mitch Albom's book, 5 People You Meet in Heaven, is a New York Times bestseller. The same thing. There's multiple tiers to the afterlife. We keep progressing through them, which is interesting to me because this is very new in ghost literature.
I'm thinking as we're talking about the book Testament of Light.
I haven't read that, sorry.
Testimony of Light. Well, it's actually a woman. These 2 women had actually established an ESP connection while they were on the earth plane. And then one of them dies. And she starts communicating with the other woman from the other side and telling her about her experiences. And you definitely see her going from one level to another and talking about that. So,
interesting, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting because this reflects something in our culture. That's what interests me particularly, that there's some shift has gone on in our culture that's starting to make its way into how we represent our culture in literature and art.
Would you actually be willing to read a little bit from the book, share a little section?
From my book? Yeah,
absolutely, your book.
Certainly not my thesis, that's for sure.
No. Although we might come back to that at some point.
And another next year maybe, when it's finished. Sorry, I'll just read a short little passage here early on, actually, if that's all right. Let me see. All right, so This is early on. This is when all this phenomena was happening, and I wasn't sure what was actually going on here at all. This is when I was in Virginia. I clambered up from beneath the pine tree. I needed to move. I needed to stop thinking. Every tiny thing sparked a memory of him. I needed to eat something. My stomach was stripped. I shook my hair out to get rid of whatever was stuck there. Something had been tugging on my hair. I couldn't see what it was, so I shook out my hair and I went to the kitchen to forage for snacks. There were slim pickings there except for a few oranges in the fridge. I took a couple, shut the door, and swung around to come face to face with a large two-dimensional solid black figure standing in the doorway. I froze. It looked like a black hole I'd seen on TV, with a perfectly crisp edge that delineated its dense, dark form from the event horizon surrounding it. But this wasn't a black hole. It was crudely outlined and had no neck, so that the shoulders and the head were fused like a gorilla. But this wasn't a gorilla. It was a tall, broad man, 6 foot easily, silent and unmoving. And it wasn't just blocking the doorway, it had been lurking behind me while I rummaged in the fridge. It disappeared. Tap, tap, tap. Juice was dripping onto my feet and all over the floor. I'd gripped the oranges so hard I'd punctured the skin. My breath was shallow and my heart was still racing. I scanned the kitchen for an explanation. Billions of times a day, my brain created 3-dimensional constructs out of 2-dimensional images impinging on my retina. Neurons in my visual cortex made the 3rd dimension appear, but not this time. The kitchen was bright, so it wasn't a trick of the light, and I couldn't blame it on peripheral vision, where floaters or fleeting black flashes often appear in tired eyes. This, whatever it was solid, stationary, in full frontal vision, and by no means fleeting.
That's quite an experience.
Yes, it was. It was indeed, yeah.
And that was one of many.
One of many. I mean, this was happening daily in this creepy old house in Virginia. You know, I was in this big old house by myself. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. And I actually had a converted attic, which is where I was. You know, I mean, it wasn't an attic, a converted attic. I was in this big, big house by myself. And it just, you know, all sorts of weird things were going on. Weird things.
You did think it was, you did sort of question your sanity for a little while there.
I did, yeah. Some of it got, I mean, there was another passage I was going to read, it's a little bit longer than that, but there was another one where somebody actually sat, I mean, if you've got time, I can read it as well if you want, but where I kind of woke up in the middle of the night. And because...
I think you could read that. I think we have time. If you
do we? Okay.
Can find it quickly.
I can, I think. Sorry, I've got my glasses on. I'm getting old. Can't see well anymore. Where is this? Sorry. Okay, this is it. I mean, this was the day before. This happened the day before. So this is how frequently these were coming together. There's some language in this, so I'll just substitute it. I went to bed that evening with my iPad and scrolled for something on Netflix to distract me from the past. A floorboard creaked. A shiver ran up my spine. I peered into the hallway with the uncomfortable feeling that someone was lurking in the shadows, but no one was there. Later, having watched a few minutes of everything and all of nothing, I drifted off. My iPad must have continued to pour faint flickers of light into the room until the battery died and the world fell to silence, broken only by the burp of a bullfrog, the hoot of an owl, and the heavy breathing of me sleeping. Creak. I jolted awake. The bed frame was groaning under a great weight. My heart raced. Someone had sat on the bed behind me. Someone big. Someone silent. Turn around, I told myself. I couldn't move. Turn around, for feck's sake, on 1, 2, 3. I flipped around, No one. I scrambled up, got tangled in the sheet, fell over, whacked my face on the windowsill and bounced back onto the floor. Pain scorched my head. Get up. My hands were shaking. I fumbled with the switch of the gaudy lamp. It flipped on. No one was there. No one could have gotten down the stairs that fast without a word. I fumbled on the table for my phone to call 911 and then remembered it was in the kitchen. Shoot. I picked up a glass Saratoga Spring bottle by the neck and crept down the stairs, peering into the dark, listening for any creak or rustle. No one could move in this house without the floors creaking. Except for the faint chirp of crickets and my own stressed breath, there was silence in every room and every stairwell the whole way down to the kitchen, where I found the windows closed and the doors locked. No one could have gotten out. Then again, no one could have gotten in. I slipped onto the front porch and sat on the steps in a t-shirt and boy shorts, clutching the bottleneck with white knuckles, hearing nothing but the normal sounds of the night. After an hour of sitting out there in the dark, I decided I'd imagined the entire thing and went back inside. I stood in the hallway for a few minutes, afraid to move, listening, hearing nothing and no one. So that's exactly early on when I was like, no, this, I had to. The only explanation for this stuff was that I imagined it. You know. So it took actually a friend of mine said afterwards, when I met up with a Professor Lou LeGrand, who's since passed now, he was in Florida, and I cannot remember how I came across Lou, but I read his book and I think I emailed him and we had a few phone chats. And, you know, he was telling me how, you know, people sort of believe these things to be their imagination. It's sort of the default place you go is that this has to be your imagination. And I remembered, this is funny actually, I don't think that, I think this is in the book. I remember him saying, you know, these are extraordinary encounters, you know, don't write them off as imagination. Why don't you ask your fiance for a sign? You know, I'm sure if you ask him for a sign, he'll give you a sign, and maybe that'll help you recognize that, you know, this is not all in your head. And so I was like, a sign? And he said, yeah, ask him, say, to show you a butterfly. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. If I saw a butterfly, I'd never in a million years believe that was a sign from him. You know, I would just think it was a butterfly. Now, I want to tell you what happened, because that sort of is the end of the first half of the book, what the upshot of that. But what did happen in that phone call was, the more I kind of poo-hooed his suggestion, that somebody started dialing in. You know the way if you're on the phone and there's an extension, somebody starts dialing like that? Well, somebody started dialing in like that. And I was on a cell phone. So I was like, well, it's not like an extension in the house because I'm on it. And I said, there must be somebody on one of your extension, one of your other phones in the house, because somebody's trying to dial out while we're on the. He's like, no, I'm not. I'm on my mobile phone. There's no other phone. But so this kept happening, and we had to get, and it got faster and faster and faster, and we had to stop talking until it stopped. Right? So when it stopped, we started talking about this whole sign thing again, and me saying, there's no way, there's no butterfly, no way. You know what happened? Started again, over and over and over, until I stopped, and then we had to stop again. And then I said, okay, I have no idea what's going on here, but something's going on. But the whole butterfly thing ended up manifesting in the epiphany, ultimately, which I won't give away in case anyone wants to read the book. But it was really funny that every time I was trying to dismiss Professor Legrand's suggestion on that call, somebody kept dialing 7 digits over and over and over again, to try to interrupt it, you know. So it was these little things you kind of go afterwards, you know, when there's a saying, I don't know if it's called Occam's razor, but it's like, when you eliminate, you probably have heard this.
Yes.
You eliminate everything that's possible, whatever remains, however improbable, has to be the truth. And that's kind of where there was just no explanation for this stuff. And the more of it that happened, the more it became like this critical mass of like, at some point you have to wise up. And I told a friend of mine after speaking to Professor Legrand, who was mutual friends of me and my fiance, and I was saying, so apparently there's this thing called signs, you know, and apparently when somebody dies, they can show you things, you know. And she's like what? And I said, well, I don't know, things like butterflies or pennies, apparently, or feathers or stuff like this, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. And she said to me, you're not getting signs, because I've been telling her the stuff that had been happening. And she's like, these you're not getting signs, you're getting burning bushes, you know, because it took that much for the penny to drop. It was definitely a very difficult thing for me to get on board with. And the irony was I remember as a kid waking up and strange people standing at the end of the bed, and it never bothered me at all. And my mother remembered me having conversations with thin air, and she would say, who are you talking to? And I'd be like, that man, or, you know, Nana Mary, who I didn't even know I had a Nana Mary, you know. And but I don't know, it's amazing how the brain can just choose to believe certain things and just to the exclusion of all else until something comes along like this, beats you over the head with it until you wise up.
And choose not to believe certain things.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you describe this as an awakening for you.
Yeah, because everything changes after this. You know, I mean, friends, you know, lifelong friends kind of fell away and new people came in, you know, because old friends who knew me when I was a skeptic and was a skeptic with me, or war correspondents, whatever, you know, all of a sudden this is going on and they're like, they haven't had my experiences to be able to go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I can believe that. You know, it was so hard for me that for them, without the experiences, they couldn't get around to it at all. So it kind of meant that people who couldn't understand what was going on, and it got to the point where it wasn't just me having these phenomena, where other people's relatives, and I talk about a couple of these. There's one actually that happened in the ARE that I wrote about in the book, where other people's relatives were coming along. And I was able to just give, you know, very, very specific details about their appearance, or this, or this, or this. And the messages that was making sense to other people. So this was even beyond me just having my own experiences that you could probably, if you really tried, say, oh, it was hallucination. But those experiences of other people's relatives, there was no explanation for how I could possibly know anything about these people. They were complete strangers, you know. And so what happens then is you start working with this, and that this becomes your life, became my life of really trying to make sure that I was educated well, trained well, to make sure I was able to do a good job sitting in front of the bereaved. And so when it becomes your life, and now all of a sudden all of these long-standing friends think that you're delusional, it's like they think the best part of your life now is a delusion. And it means that you can't talk about any of that with them, because you can never convince a skeptic, can't convince anybody, as you know, of anything they don't want to believe in. And so it ends up where there's just this huge elephant in the room, and you just sort of end up sort of gravitating away from each other. But then what started happening was a whole new people started gravitating in. And, you know, and then things like writing about politics started sort of sounding like Groundhog Day. Same thing. And it just seemed so meaningless to me that I just didn't want to do that anymore. And so everything changed. Everything about work changed, focus changed, education, friends, everything changed.
And you talked about how it was not only opened up to the possibility of life after death, but larger things than that, beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, it's hard, you know, we don't know anything with any certainty. I mean, we're still running around on our feet, you know, and but, you know, it's things like just the continuity of consciousness, how it changes. It changed how I live my life. Now, I practiced Zen for many years, but as you know, Zen is non-theistic. So there's no reincarnation, there's no nirvana, there's no nothing. It's actually quite nihilistic in many ways, Zen. But I could never, Zen is all about how we live. And I somehow, there was always a missing piece of that story for me when I practiced Zen. But when these experiences happened, it was like the missing piece suddenly made itself known. Because I think that a lot of people sort of ask me all the time, well, what do they tell you about the afterlife? And what do they tell you this? But for me, it's not about the afterlife. Because if we were supposed to know the afterlife, we'd be in the afterlife. We're here clearly for a reason. And the other thing too is I've seen colors in my sleep that are not on our color wheel. So I can't explain it, the color, because it's beyond our physical world frame of reference. And this happens all the time. And so we can't understand that world unless we approximate it to describe it with language we use for this world, because language is designed to explain what we know, right? So there is no words. This is why the only thing we hear is, oh, it was an ineffable experience, because there's no words to describe a color that's not on our color wheel. All you can do is it was kind of reddish, but not reddish. And, there's no way to explain it. And so, but I don't think the point is to try to explain it. I find that the realization that consciousness continues says more to me about how we're supposed to live here, because it takes away the anxiety and the fear of death. And I know that his name has gone out of my mind at the moment, but it'll come to me. There was a big study done on how anxiety about death, Ernest Becker, how anxiety about death affects how people treat other people. And they did all these experiments where they put people in a room and they started scaring them about dying. And then they see how they would interact with other people. And they became much more cruel and violent. And the more they scared them with death anxiety, the more cruel and violent they became. And so that to me is really interesting, because to me, the most important thing about understanding that consciousness survives death is that we are here for reasons that we at the moment don't quite know, that we'll probably understand the big picture when we get to the afterlife, but it's not for us to understand this right now. It is for us, when we take away the death anxiety, then we should be able to take away the cruelty and the violence and the discrimination and all of these other things that we use to separate us from other people. You see, because when we understand there's just this one stream of consciousness, then we understand that we're all interconnected, and that our job is to be kind and to be helpful and to find meaning in life by being of service to other people, because we've only got a very short period of time to do that in, So let's do it. Let's do that while we're here, because obviously, if for those who believe that we chose to be here at this point in time, whether you chose it or you didn't choose it, it doesn't matter. The point is we are here to contribute and to be of service and to be kind and to be loving in the best way we can here. And we are afforded that by understanding that we're a part of a continuous and ongoing stream of consciousness. Do you see what do you know what I mean? That's been the biggest shift I have encountered, is that everything we do has to, it has to be for the benefit of others.
So the whole experience is taken away that feeling of separation, of being a separate little entity, not as opposed to being part of this whole big continuum, this whole big picture that's eternal, that's infinite, that goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we can understand that we're not these like separate little, wind-up toys running around, and that we're all part of one, well, then that there can't be the other. There can't be the other race. There can't be the other politics. There's only the one. And people are still going to get on your nerves, of course, but that's part of the challenge, that's part of the challenge, is can we find a way to stand up and advocate for what is right Can we advocate for the people? Can we be of service to other people? Can we do things that are not self-serving? Now, I don't mean that is we have to be martyrs. I mean, we need to be able to take care of ourselves, but we also have to be able to remember that other people are part of ourselves as well, you know, but there's no need for, it's sort of like a call to decency in a way, call to human decency for each other people, for the animals, for the planet.
Interesting. And you, speaking of caring about other people on the planet, you also do healing work. Is that?
I do, yeah. I love healing work.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'm doing a course. I'm teaching a course soon, like next month or in a couple of weeks, on Edgar Cayce trance healing, inspired by the work of Edgar Cayce, and sort of being able to work in these very, very profound, working with the guides as Cayce did, you know, these higher beings, and then being able to move into these deep states of trance to hold the space for very, very profound healing to happen. It's absolutely extraordinary, that sort of work, because in offering healing to somebody else, it flows from the power through us to them, which means we are healed in the process of healing. I mean, I love those sessions because you just come away in a state of euphoria from them, you know, because not only have you received all that healing, you've actually been offering it to somebody else as well. But the thing about healing is that it's not prescriptive and it's not diagnostic. Obviously, you need a medical license for that. But it's healing that we're basically channeling from higher powers who in their wisdom know where that healing needs to go. So we can be little control freaks going, oh, you've got a bad knee, I'm going to go fix your bad knee. But the power that, you know, may understand that there's trauma trapped in the nervous system around the knee, and there's the trauma that needs to be healed, you know, not the cartilage, if you know what I mean. And so being able to, it's a beautiful way of reminding us of that we're just like this small part of a very, very big picture, and we have very limited information, but we can have a willingness to put the ego aside, put the need to know aside, to just be open, to hold the space, to be of service to other people. And it's extraordinary to me, that's what the things that can happen, you know, in these spaces. And this and what you become aware of from just watching where the healers are working, which is always amazingly accurate. And that's where the healing is going. Now, I'm not going, let me fix your head. I'm just trying to hold the space, to channel the power, the healing power. But I can see the guides trying to say, heal the head. You know, it's extraordinary, isn't it? I love that work. But it just also is a great reminder of how magical, how mystical life really is. We can get so caught up in paying the bills and getting to work and this and banging on the floor of the neighbors and, you know, all sorts of stupid things going on. We get so caught up in that it's so easy to forget to see the mystical. And I think that's something very important that I've learned in this work, is that no matter what it is, and I actually feel I've become more earthy from this work, just from understanding things like the concept of Gaia and that interdependence and that interconnection, you know, and all of the little beautiful moments that we have, you know, in this life are all to be cherished, because we only have them for a short period of time.
Karen, do you want to tell people, is that course online or in person?
Yeah, no, it's on Zoom. Yeah.
It's on Zoom.
Yeah, because I've got people in Europe and stuff come, so it's on Zoom.
Do you want to tell people how they could contact you, and possibly if they're interested in that course, how they could?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you just go to my website, which is KarenFrancesMcCarthy.com. It's Frances with an E. So KarenFrancesMcCarthy.com. And then under courses, they'll see all the stuff that's coming up. Yeah, but it's beautiful. It's a lovely course. And I love being able to bring in Cayce's work into it as well.
Right, because Cayce gave his readings in a trance state.
Yeah.
And in that state, he knew things that he didn't know in his conscious state. Although he actually was quite psychic in his conscious state as well, but not as much as he was
in his, yeah.
So in this trance state that you're teaching people to enter into, they are aware of ways to heal or where to touch the person to heal. Is that what you're saying?
Well, because it's trance, and because Casey didn't need to be in the room with the people, right? Because he sent these readings out everywhere. So what it is it's being able to understand how to shift into those altered states, to go into those deep, increasingly deeper states of trance, to be able to just hold the space for the power of the healing guides and for the power of the one to flow through them. And then you can just observe where the work is being done. Sometimes you don't observe, but the work still gets done whether you do or not. And so it's really more about teaching people how to move into those altered states of trance, and then how to be able to surrender the ego, how to be able to still the mind, how to be able to increasingly get into that. It's very exciting work, and then we see it. So people can work with each other in the group, and people can, because you can do this by distance. Casey did this over thousands of miles. Work with each other in the class, work on healing for themselves. We also work on healing the planet. It's just very, very powerful. It's actually the bigger the group you want to send healing to, the more power flows, which is an extraordinary experience.
It sounds wonderful. And I think you're also teaching a course on mediumship, or is that started already?
I'm doing a summer immersion program for 8 weeks, and it's going to be in psychic work and mediumship work. So that's great fun. So that's going to be loads of exercises and experiments and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
And that's also on Zoom. Yeah. Why don't you give your website one more time, just in case people didn't get it the first time?
It's KarenFrancesMcCarthy.com. So it's Frances with an E, KarenFrancesMcCarthy.com. Just my name.
Wonderful. Well, you have such an amazing story to tell, and it's definitely taken you into a whole different life than you had
completely before. Yeah. One thing I do want to say about this is, if anyone wants to read, there's info about this on the website as well, but this is actually carried in most major libraries too. So if anyone wants to read it, they can go borrow it from the library. It's in the British Library, it's in the Oxford University Library, it's in the Library of Congress, it's in the New York Public Library. So you can buy it anywhere you want if you fancy that. But if you want to borrow it, you can now do that, borrow from the libraries too. So the info on that is on the website as well.
That's wonderful. Well, this has been very interesting conversation. And I hope that you'll come back again maybe and talk some more about at another time about when you finished your paper on ghost literature. Come back and tell us a little more about what you've concluded. And
I will. It's a dissertation, so it's like 80,000 words. So it's the size of a book.
Well, you don't have to read the whole paper to us.
I won't read any of the paper. I'll just tell you some highlights.
That would be great.
But I have actually noticed my kind of, what I am noticing at the moment is that I'm finding that our understanding of the continuity of consciousness is helping a world that has become very disenchanted. I think it's a reflection of the disenchantment that's been brought into the world. And I feel like it's bringing back, it's re-enchanting. It's giving us an opportunity to re-enchant the world.
It's beautiful. Like there's a yearning on people's part.
Yeah, I do believe so.
For the enchantment and the magic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Lynn.
This has been very interesting. And I look forward to discussing this another time when you've learned more about the ghost literature and have more to share with us.
Yeah. So, beautiful. And we can talk a little bit about how we got along with our Edgar Casey trance healing too.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, beautiful.
And thank you both of you for a wonderful show. That was amazing. I learned a lot by listening to it, and it made me miss the days when I was more active in the psychic community back in New York City.
So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
And thanks to everybody who tuned in. Until next time, this is us wishing you joyous journeys and amazing adventures. Before we go, how can people find you, Lynn?
How can they find me? They can find me through the ARE in New York, and I'll tell you the website. It's it's edgarcaycenyc.org, and I'll spell that EDGARCACENYC.org. I'll do it one more time. EDGARCAYCENYC.org, and they can contact me there.
Thank you, and you and the association are very well worth finding. And Karen, you sound like an amazing person. Continue being amazing.
Oh, thank you, Hercules. You too.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.